All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. It's 1943, right in the thick of World War II, and the US military has a massive puzzle on their hands. They have these heavily damaged bomber planes returning from combat missions, and they desperately need to figure out a way to reduce fatalities among their pilots. I mean, it's literally a matter of life and death. And to solve it, they figure they just need to rely on the data right in front of them, or, well, so they thought. Section 1, the missing bullet holes. So the Air Force had this clear objective, right? Add heavy armor to protect their planes. But there's a catch. They couldn't just armor the whole plane without making it way too heavy to fly. They needed to pinpoint exactly where to put it. When they started analyzing the returning planes, they found bullet holes concentrated heavily all over the wings and the tail fuselage. But, suspiciously, there were absolutely zero bullet holes on the cockpit or the engines. Put yourself in the shoes of those military engineers for a second. Looking at this pattern of damage, where would you put the extra armor? Naturally, most people, even the top military brass at the time, fell straight into a trap. They said, put the armor exactly where the red dots are. That's where the planes are getting hit. But a brilliant mathematician from Columbia University named Abraham Wald came to the exact opposite conclusion. He realized that the military was only looking at the planes that actually survived. Wald pointed out that the planes hit in those pristine, untouched areas, like the engines and the cockpit, simply didn't survive to make it back to base. You don't put armor where the returning planes were shot, you put armor where the missing planes were shot. Section 2. Defining survivorship bias. What Abraham Wald figured out there brilliantly illustrates a hidden psychological trap that actually continues to warp how we view success and failure today. Let's formally define what we're looking at here. Survivorship bias is a logical error we make when we draw conclusions only from the survivors, while completely ignoring all the ones who failed just because they're no longer visible to us. Simply put, we make terrible, highly skewed decisions because our dataset is fundamentally incomplete. We are totally blind to the failures. To really cement how wild this is, imagine a story of two friends walking through a forest who suddenly come face to face with a massive lion. One friend is a bit of a coward, so to save his own skin, he pushes his companion toward the beast and runs away. When the coward gets back to the village, he completely invents a heroic tale. He tells everyone they fought bravely side by side, but tragically his friend was lost. Naturally, the villagers praise his bravery and honor him. But the villagers will never know the truth, because the only person who could contradict him got eaten by the lion. History is written by the survivors, and no one questions the loser because the loser isn't even there to speak up. You know, the famous financial writer Nassim Nicholas Taleb actually calls this missing data silent evidence. And honestly, this isn't even a new concept. It was understood perfectly by the ancient Greek philosopher Diagoras of Melos. Someone once showed Diagoras a series of these beautiful paintings depicting the fortunate survivors of a terrible shipwreck, basically trying to prove that the gods intervened to save people. Diagoras looked at them and simply replied, "Where are the pictures of the drowned people?" Section 3. Cats, dropouts, and shipwrecks. Now, what's really interesting is that this bias isn't just limited to war zones or ancient philosophy. It literally distorts absolutely everything around us, tricking scientists, consumers, and aspiring dreamers alike. Let's look at a pretty bizarre scientific example. Back in 1987, a veterinary study was published regarding something called high-rise syndrome in cats. The data showed something that looked miraculous. Cats that fell from fewer than 6 stories had severe injuries, but cats that fell from higher than 6 stories actually seemed to have fewer injuries. The working theory was that after 6 stories, a cat reaches terminal velocity, somehow relaxes and prepares for the landing, which saves it. But I mean, do cats really become mid-air Zen masters of physics, or are we just looking at missing data again? A few years later, a much more logical explanation emerged: survivorship bias. Cats that fell from massive heights and died instantly were simply never brought to the vet in the first place. Because they never made it to the clinic, they were never counted in the study's data. The survival rate from massive falls only looked artificially high because the dead cats were silent evidence. And we fall for this exact same illusion in highly competitive careers, too. We constantly idolize a few massive megastars who dropped out of school and made it big, and that leads us to believe that success is just a matter of grit. But we totally ignore the staggering reality that 91% of music artists remain completely undiscovered on social media. We base our career advice exclusively on the 1% who survived a brutal selection process, completely ignoring the invisible 91%. The business world absolutely loves this trap. We love to hear those motivational stories about a guy arriving in a big city like Mumbai with just 100 rupees in his pocket, sleeping on a footpath, and eventually becoming a millionaire. but we completely ignore the millions of people who tried the exact same thing, slept on the exact same footpath, and never made a dime. We study companies like Apple and Facebook for lessons on innovation, but we forget to aggressively study the silent graveyard of massive failures like Nokia, Orkut, and Kodak. Section 4. The hidden financial graveyard. So, the crucial point here is that this blindness to failure doesn't just skew our perception of reality, it actively causes us to lose our hard-earned money. Nowhere is survivorship bias more dangerous than in the financial markets. If you spend any time at all looking at financial media, you'll see successful super traders treated like absolute rock stars. They give interviews, they star in motivational videos, and they make it seem like anyone can beat the market. This leads the average retail trader to massively overestimate their own chances of success. Why? Because the overwhelming majority of retail traders who lose all their money quietly close their laptops and just go back to their day jobs. Losers don't give interviews.
And this isn't just a theory either. It is backed up by some hard data. Research by financial academic Hendrik Bazimabonder reveals a shocking truth that completely shatters the illusion of the stock market. His data shows that a massive majority of listed companies actually fail to even beat the returns of basic, zero-risk, short-term treasury bills over their lifetimes. The incredible averages we see in the stock market are skewed heavily by a tiny fraction of star performers, while the vast majority of companies end up going absolutely nowhere.
It actually gets even worse. Professional mutual funds actively weaponize survivorship bias to trick you. Think about it. When a mutual fund company has a fund that's performing terribly, they don't want you to see it. So they quietly merge it into a successful fund, or they just close it down entirely. By erasing their failures from the historical record, they artificially inflate their firm's average track record by an estimated 0.9% every single year. You are literally only allowed to see the survivors. Section 5. Avoiding the survivor trap. Okay, so now that we know this invisible trap is literally everywhere, how do we actively avoid making costly mistakes based on incomplete data? Well, unlike movies, like that famous Indian film Suryavansham, where the protagonist becomes a wealthy businessman overnight, real life just doesn't work that way. To protect yourself, you need to follow a 3-step playbook. First, actively search for the invisible data. Second, always question the narrative of the winners. And third, aggressively study the failures. If you want to build a successful startup, for example, don't just read Steve Jobs' biography. Find out why 1,000 other computer companies went bankrupt in the 1980s. Practically speaking, if you're an investor backtesting a trading strategy, you absolutely must ensure your data includes delisted and bankrupt stocks. You can use platforms like Norgate for this, otherwise your results are basically fiction. Or if you want to limit your exposure to this hidden risk entirely, just stick to broad index funds and ETFs. And remember, this applies to advertising too. When a pre-screened dating site like eHarmony boasts a massive success rate, just remember that they deliberately reject applicants who might lower that rate. You're only ever seeing the odds of the pre-selected survivors. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final absolutely crucial thought to carry with you. We are biologically wired to look at the winners, the survivors, and the success stories standing in the spotlight. But the real truth, the data that will actually save you money, time, and heartbreak, is hiding in the shadows. Whenever you are presented with a winner, ask yourself, who are the invisible losers you aren't seeing?